Good evening. We greet you this evening in the name of all that is good, all that is holy, and all that is sacred, and in the warm and loving energy of this ministry, Spiritual Life Center. If you're with us for the very first time tonight, or if you're live streaming for the very first time, we especially want to welcome you because we know that you are not here by accident. We know that every one of us is here by divine appointment, and we're very, very excited about our program tonight. And we also get very excited when you remember to silence your cell phones. So please do that. And I'd like to introduce Paul Sanchez, and Paul is one of our chaplains, and he will lead us in our opening prayer.
If everybody would get comfortable and take a nice deep breath. Let go of everything. Let go of the day. Unplug from the day as we get into Unplugged. And we connect with each other and the divine. And we feel that spirit within us. And we are grateful for that spirit, grateful that God works in and through us all. And so, in one voice, we simply say, thank you, God. Together, thank you, God. And so it is.
Thank you, Paul. The chaplains will have their healing circle right next door. If you have not been to that before, it's an amazing experience. And they will do this right after this service. You just go right through that door into the other room. Next week is a fifth Wednesday WOW, and Paula Mandela, our music and arts director, always brings in something a little more fantastical than we do during the rest of the month. To this time, it's going to be Jennifer and Chris Enright, and they will bring us Songs We Weave. And it's going to be something that will help us step confidently and joyfully into a new decade, exploring the tapestry of life and songs that express the sweeping dimensions of emotion woven into our lifetime. In other words, just come and enjoy the music. It's going to be great. So, of course, the soup will be at 6, and the program will start at 7. And next Sunday, we have our very first community meeting of the year, and this is an important one. It sounds a little boring because we're going to be talking about things like implementing the new membership model and changing the bylaws, but these are really important things that are taking place to help us support our mission-centric ministry. So it would be really, really good for everyone to come to it. It's the voting process, and there's going to talk about all the events and activities that support SLC, and of course talking about our theme for the year, which is cultivating community. That program starts at 12:45, or the meeting starts at 12:45 and goes till 2. And the choir will be offering one of their lunches, delicious lunch sales after the 11 o'clock service, so you don't have to go anywhere. You can just hang out here and then just come back into the meeting. And then our chaplains are offering a prayer class that will start on February 13th, and it's 3 consecutive Thursdays. Now, if you want to become a chaplain, and we'll be hearing more about that in the weeks to come, you do need to take this class, but the class is open to everyone. So if you want to deepen your prayer experience, come along to that, and I believe it starts at 6:30. Thank you. 6:30 to 8:30? So also you'll be hearing more about that, so stay tuned. Speaking of staying tuned, yeah, I know. Our guest has spent her life talking and half of it listening. Since 1998, she has worked at Capital Public Radio, hosting news and music shows and interviewing authors for CapRadio Reads. Her job, she says, is not to make sense of the news, but to be with you as you listen. Her spiritual path is based in empathy. Her interfaith practice is a reflection of traditions around the globe. Her ministry is built into her presentation. When she is not on air, she is often on stage at events in the region. A while ago, she performed Casey at the Bat at Music in the Mountains. She volunteers with the board of a national animal rescue organization and has deployed to work at emergency shelters. She is a regular speaker at several spiritual organizations. Please welcome Reverend Donna Apidone to the stage. Hi.
Hi.
Have a seat.
Hi.
I was telling Donna that on Sunday, when I made the announcement, I said it was the ultimate professional and the ultimate amateur here. It was going to be an interesting night. And you're not used to being interviewed. You're the interviewer
I
most of
think
the
it's only happened maybe 2 other times.
All right.
I know. But they went well, so I'm not worried.
And so the first question I usually ask is, excuse me, is, of course, I'm trying to backtrack now, but you are an interfaith minister. You also, your primary job, obviously, is as are you called a commentator, a reporter? What is your...
Announcer, host.
Announcer, host.
Announcer or host,
Okay.
or both. I think the business card says host.
Okay. So how did you, as a little kid, I mean, first of all, did you grow up in any kind of spirituality? And then since you ended up in this world of radio, how did those two things start to come about in your life? When you're really little, did you want to be a radio host?
Yeah.
Did you?
I did. I really did. That was like about 6 different questions right there, by the way.
See? And we found one to work with, so there you go.
I wanted to be a rock and roll DJ. I wanted to be a rock and roll performer, but I can't play an instrument and I can't sing, so it's kind of limited possibilities. So, but I was really enthralled with everything I heard on the radio from about the age of 8. Now, the backstory on that is my mom was kind of a radio groupie. When she was in high school, she had 2 passions in her life: baseball and radio. And she and her friends kind of worked their way into some radio stations when they were in high school and used to, talk to the guys who were DJs and find out what music was really cool and do all of that. So the radio was always on in my house. My mom was listening to rock or country, and my dad was listening to opera. And so I love it all. And when I was, 8 or 9 or 10, that was what all of my friends were doing too, and with our little transistor radios. And it was just a lot of fun. So I kind of came up in that era of anything is possible, and maybe this is something I want to pursue, and eventually found my way into a studio. Didn't get in front of a microphone until college. Sort of a campus radio station. And then just kind of kept going from there.
So it really was about putting one foot in front of the other, and you were already walking your path.
I was. Didn't even know it. But what I didn't know was I really thought it all had to be about rock and roll at that time. And then eventually, some other kinds of music. And I've worked at all kinds of stations: commercial, public, country, classical, rock, all of those things. And I really thought it all had to be about music until, maybe 30 years ago. And then realized there's this news thing too. But I'm not a reporter, never have been. I will occasionally do a story and love interviewing people, but I don't do the kind of reporting that my colleagues do. I do interviews. So yeah, I was walking the path, wasn't it? In all those times when I was in 5th grade and I got in a lot of trouble for talking in class, I just eventually said, Mom, I was just practicing.
But surely there were some, and I'm not calling you Shirley, but surely there were some bumps along the way. I mean, were there? I just have to, because we were talking earlier about how things were for some of us earlier in the 20th century. But was it harder for girls to break into radio than it was for men?
Oh yeah, for a long, long time I was the only girl on the staff. And
you were a girl, you weren't a woman, right?
Well, yeah, and I was really young enough at that time to get away with that. So, yeah, for a long time, I was the only female on the staff, and I'm not sure exactly when that changed, but it did. And all of a sudden, it's not unusual anymore, and it hasn't been for some time. But yeah, I went through that whole phase of having to be a little bit sillier because I was the only girl there. Yeah.
So along with walking that path, did you have a spirituality that you grew up in or that was parallel to this, or was it just all about radio and rock and roll?
Well, I grew up with a lot of spirituality around me, and I grew up with a lot of understanding of a number of religions. In my family and in my friends and in my community, we were very interfaith, and we still talk about that. I'm still very close to a lot of the people who I worked with very early in my career, and I'm still very close with a lot of the people who I grew up with as friends and as classmates. And we talk about that a lot, that we were interfaith before interfaith was interfaith. I mean, we just always, one version of my bio says that we traded services the way other kids traded Barbie and Ken clothes. You know, we're always like, yeah, come to my synagogue, come to my church, let's go to the mosque. You know, we were always doing that kind of thing. So it never seemed very unusual in family or in community to be interfaith at all.
So it was just a natural progression when you...
It was a natural progression about 40 years later. It was. I was always interested in what people practiced. I was always interested in knowing what people believed in, but I never really felt like I really believed in anything much at all. And then suddenly I was so interested in knowing what people believed in that I started formulating my own little path. And I consider myself truly interfaith because I do grab a lot of little pieces from a lot of different traditions, and I don't follow any one of them. I really am very interactive with a lot without focusing in any one area.
How did you get to SLC? What was that?
I came up, Watt Avenue.
Originally,
almost 16 years ago, my partner died very suddenly. And there was a little bit of it's really serious now. There was a little bit of mystery and intrigue and bad juju around his death, and it was not just traumatic that he died suddenly, but it was traumatic in its style. And after the initial shock and after the initial all of those things that you go through for about 5 or 6 months, I got up one Sunday morning and said, I think I need something. And I really did not know where to look for that. And someone had at some point mentioned Spiritual Life Center. So I went, oh, okay, fine. And decided to look it up. And I remember walking in and sitting down, and it was a Pioneer at the time, and Richard Burdick was singing before the service. And I remember thinking, I don't know any of this music. I don't really know what's going on here. But it's just, it's home in a lot of ways. And so I became a fairly regular attendee for a number of years and served on the board. And I was the Sunday announcement person for years. Yeah, I wonder how I got that job. And served on the board for a term and a half, couple of terms, something like that. And then I was in seminary at the time that I was on the board, and it was just a lot to do, so I dropped off the board and did some other things instead.
Seminary is just a little bit of a distraction, yes. Yeah. So let's just talk about going to seminary. What was that? People always think it's a decision to go be ordained. They think it's a decision, and it's not. is it? It's not a decision.
It's not a decision. In fact, it was like I was fighting with it. I remember I'm going to seminary. No, why would I go to seminary? I don't want to go to seminary. I'm not the kind of person who goes to seminary. I shouldn't be a minister. And then I realized I was one, and maybe there were some things I needed to learn if I was going to do it pretty well. So it really is not a decision at all. It's just, it sneaks up on you sometimes. I'm not sure that, I think of the interfaith ministers who I studied with and the ones who I've known through SLC. I think most of us fought it or argued with it for a while, but knew it had to be done.
I don't think I know any of us who didn't, in one way or another, argue it, ignore it. I kept saying I'm supposed to be a minister, and then I just kept running like crazy. You know, God's not, and my excuse was God was not allowing it to happen the right way.
That
Hey,
God,
you know,
man, I'll tell you.
It worked for a while, but it's just simply not a choice. So, but you have also continued to your primary work in radio, and so that is, it's like
They're not separate.
I was going to go. Yeah, right. Go ahead. They're not separate.
Well, a lot of the things that we said, you know, we had to give our mission statement in seminary and make these big proclamations to each other and God and all the world. And I remember saying, I'm really just doing this so I can be a better me. And that was true. But then once you're ordained and once you have that reverend in front of your name, like, people are looking. Maybe I should be, you know, act a certain way or do a certain thing. And then pretty soon you're being a minister. The world is a ministry, you know, and I get in front of that microphone for how many hours every morning, and it was part of why I wanted to be in seminary, was to try to figure out how all of these people who are arguing with each other and fighting with each other, what do they really have in common? What do we all really have in common with each other? And how are we going to work that out? And so weather does not seem like much of a ministry, but talking to you and letting you know what you should wear in the morning, and explaining how that's going to change during the course of the day, and also then letting you know why that thing that's happening in Detroit has something to do with you. That connection is ministry. So it has changed the job that I have in a big way.
I know that there used to be this joke way back when FM radio first started that everybody spoke very quietly, and, you know, as opposed to the AM stations where they were yelling at us, right, and then go over, and there used to be jokes about people falling asleep. But of all of the people that I've heard on NPR, you have the most soothing voice. You could
no, I'm supposed to be waking people up every morning.
No, soothing. That's different than, no, it's not, it's soothing. And it's like you could probably go on the radio at 4 o'clock in the morning and announce nuclear war, and we go, it's okay because the way Donna's talking. I mean, you know, soothing is not boring and it's not putting you to sleep. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's reassuring. And it's that you really do get across that this is how this relates to you, and this is what the weather's going to do for you today. I mean, that really comes across.
Radio 101 is you talk to one person. Right. If you try to talk to everybody, it blows it because you only listen as one person. TV is different. People sit around a room in groups and watch TV, but radio is a very individual thing. So we know from day one in a studio that that's how we have to address it. But I've heard that before. I had a friend of mine said, you told me, during a heat wave a number of years ago, he said, you told me it was going to be 112 degrees today and that for some reason I would enjoy that. And then right after a recent election, I heard a similar comment. That somehow it's, why does this sound like it might be okay? I don't know.
Well, maybe it's part of what we were talking about earlier is that you definitely come from the point of view that it's happening to all of us. It's not happening to whatever's happening is not just us in the United States. It's everywhere. And so how do we do that? How do we be with that? And there's something about the way you present it that you're somehow telling us how to handle it.
How do we handle it? Well, I do have the philosophy that this is not new or unusual. It's not a political statement that I'm making at all, but I think what's happening in the country right now is something that's happened in a lot of countries through history. It's something we have to figure out and learn from, and it's important for those reasons. It's important because there's something we need to know that we're not looking at if we're not happy. And if it's a whole country that's possibly not happy, then we better look really, really closely as a group and as individuals. But it's not the first time in history that a country has gone through this kind of questioning or this kind of turmoil or this kind of happiness or unhappiness, depending on who you are. And I also don't think the world is in any worse shape. We have more ways of hearing about the world now than we've ever had. We have more access to it. We're drowning in media to a certain extent. So we are allowing ourselves to think that it's different and worse. And not that it's not critical. It certainly is. We're in an important place in the world and in the country in a lot of ways. Is it worse than it's ever been? I don't think it's worse than it's ever been. Not that I was here for the whole thing, but I think we have more access to it. We're hearing more about it, and so it seems worse. But Moses had some locusts and thought that was going to be like you can go way, 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 way back in every country, in every generation, in every era, and there was somebody who thought that was as bad as it could ever get, and we move on and we go forward, and the generations continue.
So is that way of thinking one of the things that helps get you through some of the really horrendous stories that you come across? You talked about when you gave one of your talks here that there are some times where you just, how can I even go out and say this? But there it is, or you watch because you see everything that comes in. Yeah. And so is this kind of this way of thinking about it to help you do that?
Well, don't get me wrong. There was a moment when I thought about moving to Canada. It's crossed a few people's minds. How do we get through any day? How do we get through any morning? You believe in yourself, you believe in the people around you, you believe in something of spirit, and you figure out how to put one foot in front of the other and get to the next phase. But the commonality that we have, there are plenty of stories that I hear every day, and you hear them too, where you just can't function for a minute after it's over. You get away with that. I'm supposed to do the weather after that and tell you about a legal firm. So I can't take that. I have to take a really big breath, and but it's part of the job. You have parts of your job that you have to get through, and it's just part of my job to take that deep breath, put that aside and say, okay, here's where we're going. But that here's where we're going is the important part of the job, that commonality. We are in this together. We're in this together no matter who you are, and the people you don't like right now are also in this together with you. And there we are. So going it separately isn't going to work.
Right. Yeah. And so this connectivity that we have that almost overwhelms us it's such a blessing, and I don't like the word use curse, but at the same time, it really plays with our minds and our emotions and shows us, But it's also, I think, giving us an opportunity to really look at ourselves and each of our own belief systems and what we're willing to believe and what we're willing to pass on to other people.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does. I think the connection is not always real clear to us, but it's there. This coming Sunday, I have an interesting thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go speak to the atheist group, which I think is just like, sort of like coming up here with you tonight. I'm going to push myself, get out of my comfort zone a little bit by doing something like this. Well, that's why I'm speaking to them on Sunday, to get out of my comfort zone and see how I think about connection with people and commonality between people will apply to that particular group with a completely different philosophy than I have, and see how that works, what I can say, and how they will hear it.
Because we are living in a time when there are so many people who don't want to hear anything that they don't believe in. If you don't think the way I do, don't talk to me. Right? If you don't think the way I'm not going to listen to your radio station because you're too liberal. I'm not going to listen to you because you're too conservative. I'm not going to listen to you because you don't have the color of hair I like. I mean, we have a lot of that mentality going on now. So this is very
Isn't
cool.
that silly? That is just, I know you're not speaking, you're speaking about people, you're not really expressing your own opinion, but it's just, it's silly. It's just, personally, I can't quite believe in evil. And so I have to find, I don't know why, I can't really explain to you why. I can't believe that that any one person is 100% evil, and which is the term that's been tossed around a lot in the last few years. That person is pure evil. Really? How is that possible? And I can't quite grasp that. So I'm trying to look for the good in people at all times. People in any congregation, in an atheist group, in a mosque, are fabulous people. They're different philosophies, fabulous people. So it's just talking and connecting with each person. Did I answer your question?
I don't know what the question was, so we're good. Well, because I said something to my Thursday morning group a while ago, is that we are coming into an election season.
I heard about that.
And, and that I was asking them to remember that perhaps there are people in this congregation who think differently than the majority. I think we have, a general thing here, but there are people who think differently, and that I really asked them to think about that during this next, what is it, with like 11 months and 12 years of election time, or of campaigning, and to just consider when they're talking about this, to remember that there are people might be sitting next to you in church who think differently. Because just because we come to the same church and agree on so many things, we still have differences. And those are okay.
Hope so. There's the commonality that makes it special, but there's also all the difference that makes it special. Yeah, it's interesting. In my job, people always think that I am just like them. And people will always say, well, you believe what I believe, and we believe that. I'm like, really? Where'd you get that? How do you know what I believe in? We tend to assume that people are like-minded, and we're so surprised when they aren't. But that's the beauty of it all, is that there are all those different opinions.
It would be really boring if we all agreed on everything all the time, I think.
What would be in the news if we all believed in everything the same all the time?
Well, there'd be no news. And, I was looking the other day, glancing through the newspaper at all of this person died and this person died, and I'm thinking, this is all over the newspaper, but this is the unusual stuff. This is the stuff that made the news for some reason. It's not something that happens every single day, or it wouldn't necessarily be on the news.
Well, there are slow news days when you just have to fill that time with something, and nothing has happened. And so there's some of that, too.
We told you she'd make us
I
laugh.
mean, I work for a 24-hour news station. There are those days when nothing's happening. We don't go off air. We have to do something. So then we talk about Harry and Meghan.
Let's talk about Harry.
Talk about Harry and Meghan.
What a wonderful distraction they are.
Didn't they come around at just the right time?
Yeah, I wonder if they sat and talked about that and thought, this is the moment we should do this, just to distract everybody.
Yes, good timing on their part.
And we were talking earlier about how distracted, it's interesting because we're already distracted, but then we go after certain kinds of distraction to ease our minds. And that's another thing. It's like I listen to NPR for a while, and then I go to music, and then I jump back and forth because I can only do so much at a time. Honestly, because it's especially when it's a busy news day. Yeah.
But I do think, because I don't get to jump back and forth. I used to do both. I would do a classical show and I would do a news show. So technically I was jumping back and forth. But I spend 6 hours at a time in a studio listening to news. And I've talked about that here in front of this group, that there isn't a chance to escape. And when there isn't a chance to escape, then you really just have to sit with it and listen to it, and you can't run away. And I like to think that that's a possibility for all of us. You can't really run away from what's happening in the world. You can't really run away from what's happening in the country or in your community. And if you don't try to run away from it, then you start to hear it a little bit differently. You start to try to understand it a little bit differently. It's like I'm not allowed to give opinions. The opinions I've given here are nothing. They're really frivolous if you think about it. If I were to get into really strong political opinions, I'd be out of line. And it's just, we have a binder that thick of CapRadio and NPR guidelines to follow. And political opinions is out. Can't do it. When you can't give an opinion, when you're not allowed to give an opinion, you listen more. You're not always, all of the things that we hear with the people around us, there are just a lot of people giving opinions who may or may not be well informed about it. I can't give those opinions. I'm not supposed to. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I feel stifled in any way. It's just part of my job. But it makes me listen, and it makes me want to understand in a different way. And I just wish I could share that and spread it around so that everybody else could have and take that same opportunity. Because it's mind-blowing, and it's mind-opening, and it's really kind of cool to have that laid out in front of me as something I have to do, and then find a way to do it happily and successfully and feel good about it.
Emma Curtis Hopkins, who is basically the mother of New Thought, who just taught everybody, she had material science, mental science, and mystical science. And the differences was the material science was you name things good and bad. The mental science was you name everything good, and mystical science was you don't name anything at all. And that's what you've been trained to do, is not name it. It just is. And then you listen more, and and you might be naming it on your own somewhere else,
Yeah.
but that getting past naming something good or bad and just going, this is what is right now.
It is, yeah. It's what is right now, and it doesn't have a good or a bad attached to it anymore. It's just, it's sure. We still hear the things that make us cry. We still hear the things on the news that anger us a little bit, and you say, well, why did that person do that to that other person? They're still there, but yeah, I feel like I hear them differently, and it's not like I'm saying that that's the right way to be and you should all be like that. But I wish you had the opportunity. I wish more people would take the opportunity to be that way, because it feels good to listen on that level.
Listening. Okay. Jeannie, do you have your questions? Shirley.
I am going to try to answer any question you have.
Be careful.
Yeah. I want to hear about the critters. So talk about the animals, how you got pulled into that and what you do.
I got pulled into animals. Well, childhood is when I was never allowed to have pets when I was a kid because, my mom just didn't want animals. She hadn't grown up with animals. She didn't want them in the house. She didn't want to be cleaning up after them. But we lived on a dead-end street until I was 7 years old. We had a collie, a couple of dachshunds, and I don't remember if there were any cats, but there were just like so many animals on our street, and about 7 kids who were 7 years old and younger, and we were just surrounded by this kind of community of kids and animals. So we learned the birds and the bees when Tippy the dachshund had her puppies, that kind of thing. And so as soon as I got to a point where I had my own place to live in, animals kind of find me. Somebody will call and say, we don't know what to do with this animal. Or honestly, animals have just landed in my yard, can't find who they belong to, and they end up living with me. My mother used to say there's like an invisible sign in my front yard that only animals can read that says, she's nice, stay here. And so they do. So it's been a variety of animals along the way. And somewhere along the line, I'm not sure exactly how I connected with them to begin with, but there's a national animal rescue group that's based in Sacramento called Red Rover. And we have a variety of different services that we offer. One is funding for people who have pets who are in need of veterinary care. If you can't afford that, then we help supplement that. Another one is taking some reading skills into classrooms, but reading books that are really good for young people to hear about empathy for animals, taking those reading skills into classrooms around the area. And then we do emergency shelter work. So all over the U.S. and parts of Canada from time to time, when there's a hurricane, when there is like a hoarding situation or a puppy mill, some of them are natural disasters, some of them are human-led disasters. We get called, we take the calls from sheriffs and law enforcement, so it has to be sort of an authorized call. And we have volunteers all over the country who go in and know how to set up an emergency shelter, know how to do basic care, know how to catalog all the animals and make sure they're taken care of. And so I trained to do that. Along with the training to do that, you have to be FEMA approved. So I'm FEMA approved. Which isn't as hard as it sounds, but boy, it sounds good, doesn't it? When I was deployed, it was a little bit of time at a shelter, and it was a hoarding, I don't know if you'd call it abuse, maybe borderline abuse and hoarding situation. We had animals of all sizes, every kind you could think of, and they were all in an emergency kennel that we put together, and basically it was cleaning up after them. Putting together the kennel, you catalog everybody, and then you clean up after them, you walk them, and then you clean up after them. It's really not glamorous at all. But I walked away from it saying, oh my gosh, when can I do this again? Because it just was so touching and so nice. So I served on their board for a couple of terms. I still am very active with their board in board recruitment, and don't deploy all that often, but know how to do it if I have to. So I think that's the answer to that.
Listening to your voice, it feels like I'm driving in my car. How do you distinguish between interfaith and spirituality? What's the distinction between those two things, or is there one?
I don't see one. It's just me. I mean, I guess that's just because circulated, as I said, from childhood between a lot of different kinds of things. It's all spirituality. It's all God. It's all spirituality. Sometimes it's with a big G. Sometimes it's a G-D. You know, it just depends on who you are and what your practice is. I consider myself like I said earlier, a spiritual person without a real clear-cut belief. So I don't know that I really see any difference. For myself, I mean, I don't know what anyone else believes. People who go through a really, direct line, one particular kind of religion and follow that and all of its rules may give you a completely different answer, and I think they're absolutely right. I don't see anything that's can be criticized about anybody's belief. So it's all spirituality. Oh, I just expressed an opinion. No, you didn't. Oh, I didn't really, did I? Well, no, it wasn't a political opinion. It wasn't really that kind of opinion, so I'm not worried about it. Yeah, I managed to answer that without really expressing an opinion. Who else? Hi, Joel.
Hi, how are you doing, my friend? I'd like to, you segued into me nice, thanks for setting me up for this, because I want to talk about the opinion again. One of the reasons I always listened to NPR was it seemed very unbiased, and unlike one of your competitors, it's named after a wild animal with 3 letters. But, but it seems like in the last couple years, NPR has gotten more opinionated in their interviews and stuff. They're line of questioning and stuff. And I was wondering if you have seen that, or more with the national news. But I was just wondering if you were seeing that yourself.
It's interesting. Sometimes I think that I hear that, and sometimes I think, oh no. It can't be, can it? And I think it's just because we've all been trained to be so unbiased that when I hear something that might be biased, I don't quite know if I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing. So maybe that's the same experience you're having. I'm not sure. I think what's happening is I'm not hearing a partisan down the middle of the aisle, Republican, Democratic kind of a difference in the national coverage. What I'm hearing is a news organization that isn't going to take anything from anybody and really wants some answers. That's my reaction. That's an individual's reaction, not a professional's reaction. I feel like they're no more Mr. Nice Guy. We want answers here, and so it might sound a little bit more biased. I don't think that. I mean, I'm still hearing both sides of the aisles represented. I'm still hearing all of those questions being asked of people on both sides. But I'm also hearing it's always been in depth, but I'm hearing more thoughtful questioning in the last few years than I heard before. I agree there is a difference, but I'm not sure it's partisan. More stylistic.
Shirley, you have more questions.
Oh, I know you have a lot of questions for me.
Two wordsmiths on the stage. I was considering an idea called an intimate night with Donna. Just an idea. The word intimacy, I think, is one of those really powerful words that has like almost double meanings. But when you were talking about understanding and being quiet and not expressing your opinions and listening to the opinions of others and creating a connection, I got that much. I got that part. Where does intimacy fit in with what you do? Because sometimes I get that and I feel it. Is there a difference between connection and intimacy, and what's your definition?
Well, I didn't use the word intimacy. Did you use the word intimacy? You, okay. I didn't know if you had heard it somewhere else. It was the question. Okay, the question is truly just from you, not in reference to something else you
No.
heard. I think the intimacy is probably in the ear of the beholder. I'm not sure that I'm trying to be intimate with anyone. I'm relating to you in a way. I'm not trying to really get into your life if you don't want me there, but I'm trying to, I'm finding ways to connect with you if you are open to that. And if that is successful, then I guess that's a form of intimacy. I don't feel like I'm intentionally intimate with anyone in the audience, but I am intentionally connecting.
And when you are alone in your car and there's this one person talking to you through this machine, that feels very personal and very, very, and intimate. I mean, we would probably call this an intimate setting because it's not real huge,
Yeah.
right? And so that's and the fact that you're saying that you are trained to speak to, you're speaking to one person.
Right.
You're not talking to the whole world.
Yeah.
You're talking to one person at a time.
Well, this is fascinating. I had never thought about it as intimacy, but I guess it is. Do you all agree it's intimacy? I have to rethink my entire job, and I'm not saying that flippantly. I hadn't really quite thought about it that way. So thank you. What a new perspective. I'm glad I showed up.
Just a quickie. Jeannie will come up with a mic.
Okay, I guess hi Donna. This might go along with it in this intimacy thing. So Brené Brown was interviewed a while ago that I saw this interview with Brené Brown, and she was saying, I believe to Oprah, that if you have like 2 really good friends, that's amazing. The people that, that are just really, really close. I have a feeling that you know a lot of people, and you meet them all over the community. I'm just curious if you feel in your life like, do you consider yourself more a person of the community, or in your own life, if you're willing to divulge, do you have like 1 or 2 really close friends?
Wow, that's a good question. I do have 1 or 2 really good friends. And it is different because I think a lot of people think they know me and I don't know them or don't know them well or might not even recognize them. Yeah, so there are those different degrees of that. I do have a couple of very close friends, but sometimes, sometimes there is just a me in the community. Absolutely, yeah. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The very simple reason is careers end. I don't know how often or how long I will have the opportunity to be in the community and to be on a platform and to connect with everybody. So it's a great honor to be able to do it, and now is the time because who knows what could happen. So there's that, but there's also turning the job into a ministry means that that's part of the job. I had 28 appearances last year in 2019. And I got to the end of 2019 and I was tired because it was a lot. There were a lot of preparation, a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of all the things you have to do before you get, this is easy. This is just coming up here and answering questions. But most of them involved a lot of work. And I got to the end of 2019 and I said, 28, that's too much. But here I am in 2020 starting all over again with like 4 things that I'm doing in January and February. So it's going to be another one of those. But that's my ministry. My ministry is using a microphone, talking to people, seeing, how well I can connect on a daily basis, and then being in town with everybody whenever I'm called on. the goal, it doesn't always quite work out this way, but the goal is to accept all invitations. No reason why not to. But Casey and the Bat with Music in the Mountains was really special. That was fun. Does that answer your question? I was. Thank you for inviting me. It was a great deal of fun. Thank you.
Well, this is a little out of date because we change our subjects so rapidly, but I'm going back to the intimacy versus connection. And it seems to me that you make connections with people, and you're coming from making connections with people. But the listener on the other side is taking what you're sending and listening to what you're saying, and they get a feeling of intimacy from hearing you because you're speaking to their heart, and that's where intimacy is, you know.
Yeah, that's why I said it. I think it's in the ear of the beholder. It's not really intentional on my part, but I understand that the result is intimacy.
Yeah.
There's also, there's an interesting thing that has happened from day one of the Fresh Air show. When Terry Gross interviews people, don't you feel like you're in the room with them? Mm. And sometimes she's not. They're in a studio, she's in a studio. They're often on other sides of the world. They're not even in the same room with each other, but you'd never know it. And part of her secret from the beginning was to have them talking on the phone, because when you talk on the phone with somebody, you're very intimate with them. And I think the same thing is happening when you describe your experience as a listener, that you're in the car, you're in a space where one person's company does feel intimate. So I don't think, my training as a minister is never instead of, always in addition to. That's sort of the interfaith mantra. So I don't, even as we're talking about it, I don't think it's connection versus intimacy. I think it's connection and intimacy. Just depends on which side of the speaker you're on.
Okay, and then in connection with your current line of talking right now, I'm thinking in terms of your perspective and my perspective. We were talking about retirement and talking about how right now you're connecting to a great many people on a one-to-one basis. And when you retire, your life gets a bit more private. I'm talking like, because I'm an old woman. I'm from the Stone Age. and so your world it gets back to what I've observed is that people go from having large circle of extended family and so forth, but on the last days it's the family that's there, the daughter that's taking care of the mother or something, and it becomes an extremely strong, as an ex-chaplain, a strong connection between just two people. And that's strong intimacy that that will be big in your life at that time. They're different, but they're exciting, both of them.
I think I live both sides of that now, because I'm an introvert with an extrovert's job. So as much as I spend time in the community, I do not consider myself an extrovert by any means. So I do all these things that I do, and I run around and I do these gigs, and then I go home and I lock the door and turn out the lights and read a book and don't come near me. I mean, it's both sides. So I think that's already there. I've been told I'm not allowed to retire ever. So, that'll, yeah.
Yeah, that's part of being a minister too.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have time for one more question. Go, Mondi.
It wasn't really a question, it was just a comment. There's something very powerful when you use the word acceptance, because
When I use which word?
Acceptance, because it embraces so much possibility that it is doing a lot more than just getting along.
Well, good. Thank you for that comment. Good. Thank you.
Donna, this has been an amazing 50 minutes, whatever we've done
Is
here.
it over already?
It is. That's just what happens up here. We get going and then it's over and there we go.
Wow. Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well,
What a
thank
lot
you
of
for
fun.
coming. It's been a real honor to be up here with you.
What a lot
So,
of fun. Nice interviewing technique, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. I thought you were going to ask me hard stuff.
Nah, this is just a conversation. This is a conversation with Spirit. When you come up and you stand in this spot, it's always a conversation with Spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Thank you.
So we just move right now into our time for our love offering, and you can stay up here or you can go sit whatever you're more comfortable. So
I want to see everybody. I'll stay right here.
So we know that supporting SLC is one of the things that just keeps this magic and this spirituality and this conversation with Spirit going. And we know that when we give, amazing things come back to us. And it's just such a wonderful circle of love and light and joy. So let's bless our love offering together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, and all that I circulate. Thank you, God. Just think the thank you song in your head. Okay, let's stand and see how well we can get connected so we can do our prayer for protection.